The law destroying the independence of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine, which President Volodymyr Zelensky signed on Tuesday evening, has dealt a critical blow to Ukraine's European integration process. In the European Union, although not publicly yet, they are already stating that it's time to start considering Moldova and Ukraine's accession to the European Union separately, since Ukraine's chances have become much lower. And if previously everyone blamed the blocking of Ukraine's accession to the European Union on Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, and he really was blocking it, now the Ukrainian authorities themselves have taken actions that could finally stop Ukraine's movement toward the European Union. Brussels tried to prevent this until the very last moment, and as is known, European Commissioner Marta Kos personally called Bankova and warned about the consequences of stripping National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office of their independence. But in Kyiv, they said that this is not a problem. The real problem is something else. Why are negotiations on Ukraine's accession to the European Union not taking place? It's Hungary's veto. But the irony is that just in the last few days, the European Union has finally figured out how to bypass Hungary's veto and has offered Ukraine the necessary steps. But for some reason, Kyiv turned down this offer and decided to roll back the anti-corruption reform. Now today, Zelensky assures that he will prepare a presidential bill that will supposedly restore the independence of the anti-corruption agencies. My name is Alexei Péchiy. Today is July 23rd. You know that I comment on Ukraine's domestic politics very, very rarely. But we'll discuss this topic with you from a slightly different angle because it directly concerns Ukraine's foreign policy and our European course. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, write any comment you want, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel. The link to it is in the description of this video, where we publish breaking news as it comes in. If you want to support the work of this channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. I would appreciate your support. So today the publication Европейская Правда released a major article about how the loss of independence of National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office affected the European Union's decision to postpone Ukraine's accession to the European Union. I won't spend much time digging into the internal decisions of Zelensky's team, but I'll focus on the external consequences for Ukraine. So, for a long time, the European Union couldn't unblock all the clusters to start actual negotiations on Ukraine's accession to the European Union because this decision was being blocked by the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban. And just recently, the European Union finally found a way to bypass Orban's veto. They even set a date for the opening of the first cluster of these negotiations. Yes, Viktor Orban was simply going to be left out of the process. And on July 18th, a historic meeting of the European Commission for Ukraine was supposed to take place. But something in Ukraine suddenly went wrong. The president of Ukraine suddenly decided to reshuffle the government and accordingly changed the team that had been dealing with European integration issues all this time. Many are now confused, wondering what's really happening. As Evropravda writes, at the turn of 2024-2025 officials in Brussels and many European capitals openly stated that their goal was to open all 6 clusters in the negotiations on Ukraine's accession to the European Union by the end of this year. This is actually an unprecedented speed for European bureaucracy. Nothing like this has happened with any other country in recent decades. And even before the so-called big enlargement of the European Union in 2004, such speed was not observed either. 6 months ago, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, began to publicly repeat this commitment. By year's end, all clusters will open and negotiations will commence. In the spring, this promise was broken. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban began blocking Ukraine's movement toward the European Union, turning it into the foundation of his election campaign. The European Commission realized that the problem was very real and there was no way around it yet. In Brussels, they even started talking about separating the Ukraine-Moldova pair so as not to, as they say, hold Chisinau hostage to the Hungarian veto. Hypothetically, admit Moldova to the European Union first and Ukraine later when it's possible to bypass the veto. But in recent weeks, something has changed and the European Union has once again started to announce the opening of all clusters for Ukraine by the end of 2025. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda first announced this at the NATO summit in The Hague. The European Commission, particularly Ursula von der Leyen and Commissioner Marta Koss, then began discussing this issue as well. Olya Stefanishyna, the relevant Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, also addressed this matter. And as it turned out, the European Commission actually came up with a plan to bypass Viktor Orban's veto. The thing is, Denmark came up with a brilliant plan, not to hold a vote on this issue at all. Basically, the presidency refers to the European Commission, cites the position of the European Commission itself and the decision of the June summit that Ukraine has met all the necessary criteria. Negotiations can begin. The European Commission announces the start of negotiations with Ukraine as if all the formalities have already been completed. So why gather again and vote on this decision? In other words, no vote, no Viktor Orban veto. They say a vote will still be needed, of course, but much later, when the issue of Ukraine's final accession to the European Union is raised. Moreover, as European Pravda writes, Orban will most likely, of course, start suing the European Commission over this decision, over being left out, and he will probably even win in the European Union Supreme Court. But court decisions on such matters usually take at least 3 years. However, many hope that the situation will change drastically within 3 years, and Orban may no longer be in power by then. In general, the moral of the story is that the European Commission decided to take a risk just to finally start real negotiations on Ukraine's accession to the European Union. In short, President Zelensky discussed this plan with Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen and with the leadership of the European Union at the NATO summit in The Hague in June. Then, on July 3rd, Zelensky, as you know, flies to Denmark on a separate official visit to discuss this same plan again with the Danish government. Because Denmark is initiating this plan in the European Commission. And in the end, the final decision at the European Union level is made in Rome on July 10th. In the European Union, they make it clear that the decision will be finalized on July 18th. So, Zelensky knew about the unique opportunity since the end of June, and he personally participated in the agreement on its implementation. And suddenly, some really strange events start happening inside Ukraine. First, the government committed a blatant violation of the law on the Bureau of Economic Security and rejected the candidate who was selected through a transparent competition with the support of the European Union and the votes of international experts. Then the government decides to remove Stefanishyna from the position of Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration, even though she had been leading this European integration track all this time. They take her out and appoint other people. What actions does Denmark, the intended initiator of this scheme, take in this situation? About the start of negotiations on Ukraine's accession to the European Union? Bypassing Viktor Orban's veto, Denmark simply withdraws its own scheme for starting negotiations with Ukraine on joining the European Union. And here is the final chord, an attack on National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. The European Union is now openly expressing its irritation. As European Pravda writes, European Commissioner Marta Koss called Ukraine's new Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration, Taras Kachka, and said that the law signed by Zelensky not only hinders the independence of National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, but it also directly contradicts the commitments outlined in the roadmaps that Kyiv and Brussels agreed upon as part of the preparations for negotiations. According to Koss, the European Union also considers the adoption of this law as a setback in fulfilling the 7 recommendations of the European Commission, which were a condition for Ukraine's candidate status. And when the European Union starts talking about a rollback of candidate reforms, that's a very bad signal, which ends with a pause in negotiations. A vivid example of this is Georgia. Georgia has stated that all negotiations are currently paused with the possibility of resuming them in the future. Currently, Georgia's movement toward the European Union is suspended due to the violation of candidate reforms in the country. So it doesn't work like this. As a candidate, you implement some reforms, move on to the next stage, and then, as if the reforms that were done earlier can just be undone. No, it doesn't work like that. You have fulfilled 7 recommendations as a candidate for joining the European Union. Then the negotiations begin, and you can't cancel any of that. And now the European Council says that a violation has occurred. Moreover, European Pravda, citing its sources in Brussels, writes that the participation of Europeans created the impression that the issue of joining is no longer a priority for Ukraine. But there have already been signals about financial risks for Ukraine from such a law that Zelensky signed. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development of the European Union warned Bankova, that is the office of the President of Ukraine, about the consequences for defense investments and investments in Ukraine's recovery due to the attack on National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. European officials also remind Kyiv about the budget gap that Ukraine has to cover because of borrowing. But in the European Union they say directly, are you sure that anyone will want to give money to a country where the independence of anti-corruption agencies has been taken away? And it's already obvious that we will almost certainly fall behind Moldova when it comes to joining the European Union. Because of the actions of the President's office, the so-called decoupling is becoming almost inevitable. This means separating Moldova from Ukraine in the accession process and starting accession negotiations with Chisinau, while the dialogue with Ukraine will remain frozen. Moldova and Ukraine were progressing together as a single package. Now they will be separated. So in this situation today, on July 23rd, Zelensky announced that he is preparing some kind of super-duper presidential bill about the true independence of National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, which now will not have any Russian influence. They still haven't clarified the type of influence in question. I'll put an ellipsis here. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care. Bye, everyone.